Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Christina. I'm a librarian at Milwaukee Public Library. So happy that you're here this afternoon for our workshop on canning basics. We're going to can some dilly beans. This is offered in partnership with Groundwork Milwaukee, and we have the wonderful Lynn who's going to walk us through this whole process. I want to mention just a couple of things at the start. If you're new to our webinars, just so you know, all of your microphones are muted, your webcams are off, but you can still ask questions. There should be a question box built into your view. If you're on an iPhone or some sort of device like an iPad, it might look like an actual question mark, but you can go ahead and click that. You can submit any questions you may have for Lynn, or if you have questions about the library, we can answer those. We're going to have some time at the end of the presentation to ask those questions. There is also a handout that I emailed out to everyone right before the program, but it's also available for you to download. It has some recipes on there. And then I just want to encourage you to visit the library's website, mpl.org/stay-connected, and you can see all of our upcoming virtual library programs. Okay, well, I'm going to hand things over to Lynn, and she's going to talk us through canning. So, hi, Lynn. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So there are a lot of different methods that people can use to preserve food. Certainly, you can dehydrate fruits and vegetables. You can freeze them. But canning has been a familiar method for a lot of people for a long time. When you can, there's a couple different things that you have to do. First, you have to sterilize your jars. I'll tell you that if you're a canner, you probably have jars and lids. If you're not a canner, you may have a little bitty difficulty finding jars and lids because there's been a run on them. I think a lot of people have. You can use a variety of different sizes of jars. I choose to use a jelly jar. I like the size. It takes about 30 beans to fill up the jelly jar. And I use these typically as gifts to friends, neighbors, our doctor, the mail carrier, family and friends for holidays. Typically, we also do jam. I do peach jam. I buy peaches from tree right trucks during the summer or fall, freeze the peaches, and then I make jam later on in the fall. I bought strawberries from Sam's, usually frozen ones, to make strawberry jam. I did pick strawberries one year. It was a back-breaking chore, and the berries didn't hold up very good. They quickly ripened, and a lot of them went bad quickly. So I think the frozen strawberries work better for that. But I did start canning and doing canning of raspberry jam years ago when our other house, we had a huge crop of raspberries. And so that's how I got started into doing jam. Get your jars and then make sure that you sterilize your jars. So the jars and lids can be sterilized either in a dishwasher or in, just washing them in the sink, but make sure you use really hot water. I then like to tip my jars upside down on a piece of paper towel and let the moisture drain out of them, and then it keeps them sterile while I'm doing other things. Another thing I would recommend is making sure that you gather your supplies, check your recipe, make sure you have everything you need before you start. I've had circumstances where I was making jam and realized that I didn't have enough sugar. So always make sure you have your supplies. Now, for the most part, when you can, you need some type of pot to do your canning sealing in. And typically, this is a canning pot. Big pot, fill it with water, boil it. It most often has an insert. This that you put your jars in and drop it in. Put them into the wall, boil them for the time your recipe says, and that's a great way to do it. But not everybody has a canner, and I didn't have a canner when I started out. Another method is to use not a crock pot, but a pressure cooker. Some people will use pressure cookers to can as well. I've never done that, but I've heard that it works well. So today, I have my big sturdy pot that's been in my family for probably 40 years or more. I make soup in there. I do all my canning in there. It's one of the old-fashioned, I think it's a Regal pot with the copper bottom, and it has a good temperature read on it, so it doesn't have hot spots. That works very well. So what I've done today is I've done a few jars ahead of time so that when we get to the point of putting the liquid in and then putting them in the canner, that process will go very quickly. What I'd like to do now, though, is show you exactly what you do when you're making the beans. So I have my jar. I put in 2 cloves of garlic. I actually grew some garlic in my garden. The bulbs were not very big, but they're small cloves that fit nicely in my jar. I also use some pepper flakes. I like the extra spice that adds, so I put a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper flakes in, and I put a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And then a bunch of pieces of dill. Now, I did grow dill in the garden, so I just went out this morning and picked a bunch. Depending on, your flavor likeness, you can put as much as you want. It doesn't take a lot because in addition to the actual fronds of the dill, I add a 1/4 teaspoon of dill seed as well, and that will help to flavor your dilly beans. Now, a tip: when you buy beans, you do not want to get beans that look like this, that are curved, because they won't fit in the jar very well. They'll take up more space than they need to. So what you want to do is buy nice straight beans. I bought my beans at the farmer's market. And then the next tip is, ahead of time, what you want to do is cut the ends off your beans and clean them, wash them. And then you want to take a bean and put it in your jar and see how long a bean you should have that reaches up to this bottom lip of your jar. So I've determined what that size is, and I've cut all of these beans to meet that size. The next thing I've done is I took a plain jar without anything in it, and I counted a bunch of beans, put them in the jar, and kept on adding beans until I got to the point where the jar was full. That told me approximately how many beans I need to fill a jar. That way you know how many jars you need, how many you need to prep, and then when you grab your beans, and in my case, it was 30 beans. So I've got about 30 beans here. You can gather them up, put them in a nice little bundle, and place them in your jar. It's a little bit easier than trying to cram them in one at a time. Now, the tricky part is making sure that you push the beans down as best you can, and if you have a knife, you can go around the edge gently and make sure that you're taking up all the space in the jar. So I think I have a little bit of extra space in here, so I'm going to take another bean and I'm going to try and shove it in firmly but gently. I don't want to break it, but I do want to get it down into the jar. So I'm gingerly pushing it down. Okay, I think I might be able to get one more in here. So I'm going to try and move them around a little bit and see if I can find a space. Some beans are thinner than others, so you just have to kind of practice to see where you can fit a bean. And if your bean breaks or doesn't seem to fit, try a different one. I always have a few extra on hand, already pre-cut. So if I need another one, I can grab another. Okay, now as you see, I put my my cayenne pepper, my pepper flakes, my dill seed, and some dill on the bottom. I also like to, I'm going to grab my garlic. I also like to take a garlic clove, 1 or 2. These are small, very fragrant, smells like garlic, and stick them on top. And then all the parts of the dill you can use. Now this is the top of the dill that would go to seed. It didn't because I didn't let it go to seed, but you can stick that on top along with a little bit of extra dill, just to make it a little pretty when you open up the jar. So that's what it looks like. I'll come over so you get a good shot of it. Here's your jar. Here's what it looks like. You can see the pepper and everything's in the bottom. So now we've got our jars filled and we're ready to go. What I'm going to do is bring this over here. Okay, while you were preparing your jar, the other thing that you will want to do is to prepare your brine. And it's a real simple recipe. It's 2.5 cups of water, 2.5 cups of vinegar, and then a 1/4 cup of pickling salt. There's also a dill recipe on the back of the pickling salt. I've had this pickling salt for a long time. It lasts a long time. You only use a 1/4 cup or so in a recipe, so it's not like, you know, you're going to run out of this. Okay, so I have my brine on the stove and it's been boiling, which is a good thing. It's hot. So now I'm going to bring it over. I'm going to fill my jars. Now, here's a nice tool that helps a lot, especially in jam making, because that hot molten jam or jelly can be, you know, burn your skin off pretty fast. So this fits jars. The lid, the top of the jar fits nicely so that you're less likely to spill. So I'll take my ladle. If you don't have that, you know, just be slow and careful. You pour the brine into the jar. Takes a little over one ladleful. And you want to fill it to within a 1/4 inch of the top of the jar. I always like to work on a tray with a paper towel because most often you're going to spill some. You can see this is not a difficult process. It's pretty easy. The key is having the right supplies, and you don't really need a lot of unique equipment. If you didn't have a ladle, you could just pour the brine in. You just have to be a little careful. You can also pickle asparagus, beets, any kind of, you know, vegetable. I just recently saw a recipe for pickled okra, I think. So all kinds of things. And these beans will hold up nicely. They will stay fairly crisp. They're great on a relish tray. They're also good in a Bloody Mary if you're so inclined. Okay, now our next step is to put lids on these. Again, one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you've boiled your lids. The reason you want to boil your lids is to sterilize them. It also helps to seal on the top of the cover. They don't stay hot long, but if you can see, there's like a rubber circle on the inside of the jar lid. That will help the jar seal. And what you want to do basically is create a vacuum seal so that your beans will not have any air. Okay, beans won't have a lot of air in there because what you don't want is bacteria. So the hot liquid and the boiling of the jars will sterilize and seal the jars, making sure that you will not have problems. Now, once you've gotten all your jars ready, you can put them in your canning bath. And in this case, I think our recipe calls for 10 minutes. And what you want to make sure you do is put the jars in a bath so that they're underneath the water. The recipe will typically tell you how much water you should cover your jars with. You want to surround the jar in hot water. And you want to boil. So I'm going to grab a towel because these jars are very hot now. I'm going to seal them. Once your jars are out of your bath, and when they start cooling, you put them on the counter or on something that is heat protected. You don't want to wreck your tables. All of a sudden you'll hear a ping sound. That ping sound is the vacuum packing of the seal. The seal now is kind of up or, kind of dome shaped just a little bit, maybe a flat. When they seal, it actually will be concaved. It will have a little dip in it. It seals down. Once that happens, if you want to, you can remove the rings. I leave them on, but a lot of people, take them off. You can put a decorative cover on them. Some people use different types of paper or cloth, tie gingham cloth around it with a piece of ribbon or something like that. So now our next step. I'm going to move this out. I have my water already boiling. And I am going to take my jars and drop them in the water. Now, you want to make sure that you have them standing up. And there actually is a lifter that you can get that is similar to this, but it actually fits a jar and makes it easier to do this. So today, based on the amount of beans I got, I made 5 jars. So there are 5 jars of beans in here. We're going to turn it up, we're going to boil it, and we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. Now, I probably have enough brine from my 2½ cups of water, 2½ cups of vinegar, and 1/4 cup of salt to probably do 2, maybe even 3 more jars. So, it's not a huge expense. The vinegar water is not much of an expense, so I can throw that out and not feel too guilty. But if I had more beans, I would dill some more beans. And I might use that to dill the beets that I had in my refrigerator. Christine, now might be a good time to answer any questions if there are any questions from the attendees.
Okay, great. Yeah. If anyone has questions, feel free to type those in. I haven't seen any come through yet, so let's just give them a minute to see if they have any.
Okay, I'm going to cover my pot because it is just starting to boil. If I cover it, it'll boil more vigorously. And typically what I will do when my beans are done is place them in the box that the jars came in. So this is the box of ball jars. I got these at Ace Hardware probably less than a month ago. I also ordered, because in my household, the general rule of thumb is if I give you a jar of something, when you're done with it, bring it back and I'll give you another jar of something else. So my postal lady, we give her jam, and when she's done with the jam, we'll find the jar in the mailbox and we'll put another jar in the mailbox. So these are jars. These are regular mouth size jars. There are also jars called wide mouth, which you know, are about that big around. So if you're making like peach halves or something that's bigger, a wide mouth jar is a lot easier. Also, if you're making pickles, if you're making dill pickles and they're bigger pickles, or even spears, you may want to use that wide mouth jar. I'm on a Wisconsin gardener site, and a lot of people on that site were complaining about the fact that they couldn't find jars and lids. Or if they could find them, because you can find them on Amazon, but they're very expensive. Because like everything else, the minute something is in demand, the price goes up. I did order my lids from Ball Canning, directly from them. If you order in bulk, it's a little bit cheaper. I think they were less than $1 a piece. On Amazon, I think they were going for like $3, $4 a piece, which is huge. But another tip, this lid, or excuse me, this ring is reusable. You can use this many, 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 many times. So that's why I think a lot of people don't give these away when they give their jar away. They keep the lids. I usually give mine away and people bring them back. This part, the actual lid itself, I have used some over if I knew that it was, you know, somebody that was in the family and they knew that if it didn't look like it was sealed, that they would toss it. But the rule of thumb is that you don't reuse these. Reason being, when it's sealed and you have to get it off, oftentimes when you break the seal, you will dent the edge of the rim and then you won't get a good seal. So I would recommend that you get new lids all the time, but keep your rings. So we have about 5.5 minutes to go. Let's see, what else can I tell you about canning?
And we did have a couple of questions come in.
Oh, good.
Yeah, someone asked if you could please repeat the recipe you used for the spice mix at the beginning.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Okay, so the recipe calls for a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, a teaspoon of pepper flakes, 4 garlic cloves, 4 teaspoons dill and fresh dill heads. But my rule of thumb is in these jars, I just do a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne, a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper flakes, a 1/4 teaspoon of dill seed, and then I just put in 2 to 4 cloves of garlic, depending on how big they are. If they're small, I usually put 2 in the bottom and 2 on top. And you have to see, if you don't like garlic that much, that's fine. Don't put in the garlic. They won't be really garlicky, but the longer you let them sit, the more spicy they will get. And they're not what I would call hot, but they have a little bit of bite to them. Another way to kick up the spice in them would be to get some little bitty peppers. Again, now Great Farmers Market, they sell those, I don't know, they're about maybe 1.5 inches or so. They're long, skinny peppers. Those would look great in the jar with the beans. I think it would, you know, be very attractive, and then you get a little bit more kick of pepper.
Okay, and then someone asked, is this the typical canning process to use for other things like peaches, for example?
Yes, you'll have to get a recipe to follow, because I wouldn't can if I didn't use a recipe. But the process is typically the same. So if you had peaches, you would cut your peaches or leave them in halves or whatever. You would create a simple syrup of sugar and water. Again, very hot, get that hot. Sterilize your jars, put your peaches in, put whatever flavorings. Now I've seen people put booze in with their peaches, so you know, drunk peaches, cinnamon, cloves, different kinds of spices, depends on what you like. But put that in the jar with your peaches. Pour the syrup over the peaches till it's, right at the top of the rim, this lower rim. And then the same thing. Use your sterilized lids and rings, seal them, and boil them. The only thing I don't boil, and if you looked at the recipes, I think this probably says that you should boil it, but I never do, is when I make jam. The jam, when you put it in the jars, is so hot, it would melt skin off your hand. So when you pour it in and put the lid on, you can barely touch the jars. So when you seal the jar, I put them upside down. That hot molten lava from the jam heats the seal, and I let them that way for a little, 15 minutes or so. Then I turn them over, and as they cool, they seal. And I've never had a problem with my jam. So, but I think some recipes do call for boiling them too.
Great, thank you, Lynn. We had a couple of attendees ask how long the beans will actually last, or how long will they keep once they're canned?
I've had beans, I think the typical rule of thumb is like 14 to 16 months. I usually use things up within a year so that, I've used them up by the time I'm going to start making them again the next year. And people that don't like sweet, so people that don't like the jam get the beans. But typically, and this is something you can Google too, I think there might be different fruits and vegetables that have different shelf life. I know one of the other things I'm going to do is I had a bunch of tomatoes, and I don't really can tomatoes. I've never been a tomato canner. We use our tomatoes during the season, and then whatever tomatoes I have at the end of the season, I typically will make a sauce from them. So I'll, clean them, cut them, take the, stems out. I will boil them. I will put them through a sieve or a food machine. I'll use maybe different kinds of things to mash them up, and then I put them through a sieve to get the seeds and any skin that's left out. I do have a big container of tomato juice that I just did yesterday from tomatoes that were in the garden. So my plan is to make tomato jam. Now that's something you don't see all the time. And I had an aunt, and in honor of her, I will bring out her cookbook, which I made from all of her recipes. This is my favorite Aunt Betty recipes. And she had a wonderful recipe for tomato jam. And it basically was tomato juice, cinnamon, clove, ginger. And it's sweet because it's a jam. You put sugar in it, so you make it like all other jams. Oh, there's my timer. But it's very nice. It goes nicely with like if you have a cheese tray and crackers, it goes nice with that because it's that kind of unique, spicy, sweet taste. So I like that. And at Christmas time, we give all of our kids and grandkids and whatever family that come over, which I think we're going to have everybody COVID tested this year before they come. But we let everybody pick and choose what they want. So everybody either gets strawberry, peach, tomato. My son-in-law likes blueberry, so I usually do some blueberry for him. And then if they don't want sweet, then they can pick the dilly beans. So those are typically our choices. So now I'm going to carefully take the jars out one at a time. Just in case. Now, the one thing I will tell you, when you do anything with a brine, the longer it sits in the jar, the longer the salt in the brine will potentially impact your your rings. So you could get a little, when you take the lid off, it could look a little, salty on the top. Before I store these, what I will do is shake them up a little bit to make sure that the pepper and everything is distributed a little and not just on the bottom. Another way to do that would be to shake some of your spice on the top and leave some of it on the bottom when you're actually, the jars. Okay. So these jars look exactly like they did before, only they're hot as can be. Oops, this way. They're hot as can be. You can see the dill and the cloves of garlic on the bottom. And as they cool, the lids, which, let's see this one. I don't know if you can see it. It's fairly flat, but it's not completely indented, and it will indent as it cools, and you'll hear a nice ping, ping, ping. So, and there's no timetable on it. So, if you do a lot of canning and you have your canning jars, I'll sit my jars on the dining room table, and I'll be downstairs in our family room, and all of a sudden I'll hear ping, ping, ping. And it takes, the jars take different times. So that would be my recommendation. As for other things that you can can, someone had asked that question. In my garden, I have cucumbers, peppers, green, orange, yellow, red peppers. Those kind of peppers, they pickle very well. They take on a nice flavor. They last a long time. Typically, if you pick them and pickle them when they're fresh, they'll keep their crispness. Also, different kinds of carrots, any kind of vegetable, like root vegetables, carrots or broccoli or Brussels sprouts, any of those kinds of things. Mushrooms are really good pickled. So the pickling process is fairly easy, doesn't take a lot of time, as you can see. The most time is spent in prep, and it's not that costly when it comes down to it. So if you were to go to a craft fair and want to buy a jar of pickled beans or pickled mushrooms or something like that, you'd probably pay anywhere from, depending on the size of the jar, $8 to $15. So to have this kind of thing in your on your shelf, or if you have somebody stop in and you want to give them a thank you gift, boy, I can tell you how many times I've run downstairs and gotten a jar of jam for someone that did us a favor or helped us in some way as a thank you. And I think it's really appreciated. Homemade gifts are really appreciated. I know that my raspberry jam and the strawberry jam in the middle of winter, putting that on, a piece of toast or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it tastes like summer. It tastes like fresh, and people enjoy it. So that's why I do it. So here you have it. Dilly beans, easy to make, great to eat. Anybody have any additional questions?
Thanks so much, Lynn. Yeah, there was one other question that came in. Where's the best place to store the beans once they're canned?
Once they're sealed, I guess the only thing I would recommend is you don't want them to sit in the sunlight. So typically in your pantry, in a closet, if you have a basement, you could store them in the, in your box. Typically what I do is I will store them in a box, just like this. And I will put them on my basement steps. I have a series of steps, and each step has a different box of something on it. The other thing you might want to do, and I've done different things over time, is label these. So you used to buy jars, and when you bought jars, they would come with labels, and you could write on them. A lot of places don't do that anymore. So you can actually get labels at like Office Depot, circle labels that you could print. And you know, what's the name of the label? Avery, I think it is. Avery, you just, you know, select their option for doing the circles. And it's really nice. They look very cute. You can, you know, print whatever you want on the top of them. If you don't have those, you couldn't buy those anyway and write on them or color on them. Or you can just use regular mailing type labels, you know, like, I don't know, they're like maybe 1 by 2, something like that. And just put, what you want to do is typically put the date. So from, you know, September of 20, and then, you know, say what it is. Probably not so important because you can easily see that these are Dilly Beans. But if you have jam, and there are different kinds of jam and they look a little bit alike, you're going to want to label them and make sure that everybody knows what type of jam it is. And you can be creative. You know, there's, you know, strawberry, rhubarb, different types of berries, raspberry, blueberry, I made grape jelly one year, and strawberry, and any kind of flavor combination that you can think of, I will bet you'll find a recipe for it. I sometimes look on Pinterest, or I just do a Google search, and the Google search will give me a variety of different recipes. I have some of them saved on my laptop so I can go back and look at them, but otherwise, if I'm, you know, in a hurry, I'll, you know, just do a search. The other thing that I like to do, or freeze, depending on how I feel, is applesauce. Now is a great time of year to get apples, and if you go to farmers markets or, you know, someplace where you can get fresh picked apples, they usually have seconds. And seconds are apples that have like a little dent in them, a little bruise in them. They're a lot cheaper than if you buy a, you know, a bag, a 5-pound bag of apples. It's a lot cheaper. And then one year I invested in one of those peelers, and it makes quick work of coring and peeling and slicing the apples. Again, I use my handy pot, put all the apples in there. I'll usually buy some apple cider to use as my fluid and just put a half a cup of apple cider in there to get it going. Depending on the tartness of the apples, you may want to put some sugar in. You can use brown sugar, granulated sugar. You could probably use Splenda or some other kind of sweetener. And then if you want to use cinnamon, you can put some cinnamon in there. I typically cook the apples till they're really soft, because I like my applesauce, you know, more finely ground up. Once in a while, if we're doing something like, you know, we're having a dinner and the applesauce is going to be with a pork dish or something like that, I may make applesauce and leave it more chunky, because then you can put it on a plate. It doesn't have to go in a bowl, something like that. But yeah, applesauce is another of my favorites. As a matter of fact, I just made applesauce with apples like a week ago from the farm, and I always go to the farmer's market to get those kind of things. So this is still very hot, too hot to touch.
Lynn, could you repeat what size jars that you used for these beans? Someone was just curious.
Sure. These are ball jars, and they're jelly jars, so they're a half pint. Now, I know a lot of people do make pint jars of beans. It's a bigger jar, typically a wide mouth jar, so it's double, you know, double the size. So it's not that wide. It's probably about this tall, and it has a, you know, a bigger lip on it. It depends on how many beans you have, and if you have a lot of beans, you know, that may be a better way to preserve them. It depends on what you're going to do with them too. Like I said, I like this size because I think it makes a nice gift. Or if somebody, you know, if you want to have a relish tray or something, you're opening a jar and you're not opening like a huge container of beans.
Okay, well, I think those were all of our questions. We have some audience members just telling you thank you for the great presentation and all of the information. And I know I'm like quite hungry now just listening to all of these. But I want to thank you, Lynn, for this really informative overview, and thank you to the audience for joining us. And I hope you are inspired to try out, Lynn's tips. I will send a follow-up email that has a link to this presentation as a recording. So if you missed something, you can always watch that recording again, and then I'll include her recipe, so you'll have that. And make sure you visit the Groundwork Milwaukee website and support them. I just want to thank them so much for partnering with the public library. This is our third presentation with Groundwork Milwaukee, and I learned something new every single time. So I just appreciate them so much. And thank you, Lynn, again. Yeah, go ahead.
If there are any other questions that, if anybody posts anything that you get questions, I'd be happy to, send you responses on those as well. And hopefully next time we can maybe do a jam session.
Oh, I would love that. That sounds so great. We had someone in the audience just say, thank you that they're watching from Pennsylvania. So hi, thanks for tuning in.
Hi, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, have a good afternoon, and everyone will be hearing from me with those links. And thank you again.
Great. Thanks. Have a great